And then finally, in that previous slide, from quaternary consumers, they eventually die and become decomposers. So this is referred to as a food chain. Now, a food web are recognized that food chains are not isolated units but are linked together in food webs. So an ecologist can summarize the trophic relationship of a community by diagramming a food web with arrows linking species according to who eats whom. So this is an Antarctic marine food web. Allows the transfer of food from the producers, the phytoplankton, up through the trophic levels. For simplicity, this diagram omits decomposers. So you can see phytoplankton to copepods to krill. The krill and copepods are eaten by carnivorous plankton, but the krill and copepods are also eaten by fish and birds and squid, and the krill is also eaten through the baleen, the water that goes through the baleen in the whales, because remember they're suspension feeders. And then crab seal eaters, smaller toothed whales. Here leopard seals eat the fish up through smaller toothed whales. Squid, copepods to squid to fish, to elephant seals, to sperm whales. So you can see this can get very complicated. So a food web is a branching food chain with complex trophic interactions. A partial food web for the Chesapeake Bay estuary on the United States Atlantic coast. So the sea nettle and juvenile striped bass are the main predators of fish larvae. Bay anchovy and several other species. Note that sea nettles are secondary consumers. Black arrows when they eat zooplankton, but tertiary consumers, red arrows, when they eat fish larvae, which are themselves secondary consumers of zooplankton. So this is a partial food web. Sea nettles are primary and tertiary consumers. Species with a large impact. Certain species have a very large impact on community structure. Such species are highly abundant or play a pivotal role in community dynamics. Dominant species, the ones that have the highest biomass, are the most dominant, exert powerful control over the occurrence and distribution of other species. For example, sugar maples are the dominant plant species in many eastern North American forests. Has a major impact on abiotic factors such as shading in soil, since they're deciduous trees, which in turn affect what other species can live in that area with the shade in the summer, spring, summer, fall, and the type of soil produced from the falling sugar leaves. Keystone species. In contrast to dominant species, keystone species are not necessarily abundant in a community. However, they exert strong control in a community by their ecological roles or niches. So a keystone can be identified in the following slide. Okay, so here field studies of sea stars exhibit their roles as keystone species in intertidal communities. So the sea star Pisaster feeds preferentially on mussels but will consume other invertebrates. So when this sea star was removed from the intertidal zone, mussels eventually took over the rock face and eliminated most other invertebrates and algae. In a control area from which the keystone species was not removed, there was little change in species diversity. So here's species diversity, number of species present, without the sea star, with the sea star. So this is a keystone species. So the definition is they exert strong control on community structure, not by numerical, but by their pivotal ecological roles. Ecosystem engineers, foundation species. Some organisms exert a strong influence by causing physical changes in the environment, and then they affect the community structure, such as this beaver is an ecosystem engineer. So by felling trees, building dams, and creating ponds, beavers can transform large areas of forest into flooded wetlands. So facilitation by blackrush in New England marshes increases local plant richness. Okay? So some foundation species act as facilitators that have positive effects on survival and reproduction of some other species in the community. So the blackrush facilitates the occupation of the middle upper zone of the marsh. Okay, so juncus is blackrush. So since it facilitates the occupation of the middle upper zone of the marsh, which increases local plant species richness. So with the blackrush, without the blackrush. So obviously plant species increased in richness. The number increased. Bottom-up and top-down community controls. The bottom-up model of community organization proposes a or one-directional influence from lower to higher trophic levels. In this case, presence or absence of mineral nutrients determines community structure, including abundance of primary producers. Okay, the top-down model proposes that control comes from the trophic level above. In this case, predators control herbivores, which are primary producers. So, relationship between rainfall and herbaceous plant cover in a desert shrub community in Chile. Long-term experimental studies have shown that communities can shift periodically from bottom-up to top-down controls. So the red dots plant growth during non-Niño years. Okay, percentage of herbaceous plant cover and rainfall over here. Blue dots, El Niño years, a lot more moisture, percentage of herbaceous plant cover. So it shifted from bottom up to top down. Biomanipulation attempts to prevent. So the top-down model has practical applications. For example, ecologists have applied the top-down model to improve water quality in polluted lakes. This approach is called biomanipulation, can affect community dynamics. So biomanipulation attempts to prevent algal blooms and eutrophication by altering the density of higher-level consumers in lakes instead of using chemical treatments. In lakes with 3 trophic levels, for example, removing fish should improve water quality by increasing zooplankton and thereby decreasing algal populations. In lakes with 4 trophic levels, adding top predators should have the same effect. You can summarize the scenario with the following diagram. So fish, zooplankton, algae, polluted state, abundant, zooplankton rare, algae abundant. In the restored state, the algae are rare, which you want, zooplankton abundant, which you want, and then fish also rare. So this is biomanipulation. Disturbance influence species diversity and composition. So decades ago, many ecologists favored the view that communities are in a state of equilibrium. However, they found out that change has led to a non-equilibrium model which describes communities as constantly changing after being buffeted by disturbances, such as Hurricane Katrina. Around here, Hurricane Isabel in 2003, the local communities changed. So what is it? A disturbance. Hurricane, an event that alters a community, removes organisms from it, and alters resource availability. So a storm, like I was saying, a fire out west when you have big forest fires, even in the Appalachians, flooding, drought can have a drastic effect, overgrazing, and the last, human activity has had a devastating effect on communities. So long-term effect of fire in a tall grass prairie community in Texas. So fire is a significant disturbance in most terrestrial ecosystems. However, it is often necessary in some communities. So this is the prairie. It's rather choked out before a controlled burn. A prairie that has not burned for several years has a very high proportion of detritus, dead grass. So it becomes choked out. So during the burn, the detritus serves as fuel for the fires. Then after the controlled burn, approximately 1 month after the controlled burn, virtually all of the biomass in this prairie is living. So this has increased germination, and it's gotten the deal out because that is what burned. Patchiness and recovery following a large-scale disturbance. Moderate levels of disturbance can foster higher diversity than low levels of disturbance. So on the left, soon after the fire, the burn left a patchy landscape. Note the unburned trees in the far distance. Okay, on the right, 1 year after fire, the community has begun to recover. A variety of herbaceous plants, such as these lupins, different from those in the former forest, cover the ground. So this was the 1988 Yellowstone National Park fires burned large areas of forest dominated by lodgepole pines. And I was in Yellowstone Park in 1999, and it still looked like a moonscape at that point. Human disturbance. Humans are the most widespread agents of disturbance. Human disturbance to communities usually reduces species diversity. Also, humans prevent some naturally occurring disturbances which can be important to community structure. So, ecological succession. It's the sequence of the community and ecosystem changes after disturbance. Glacier, volcanic eruption that strips away all the existing vegetation. So the primary succession occurs where no soil exists when succession begins, such as a new volcanic island or the rubble left behind by a retreating glacier, or perhaps an area that's been flooded and all the vegetation's been swept away. Secondary succession begins in an area where soil remains after disturbance.